You were talking about the labyrinth, and we were talking about the signs and getting out of it, and we were talking about, well, the signs turning into words. And there's this piece I picked up that I hadn't seen before about the red thread. And the red thread is this ribbon, you'd say, and it's what kind of pulls these words together into something you can follow, like into to sentences, into language, into literature. And the funny thing about this that we're also talking about, because we're talking about medium and mediality and this space that we are in a certain sense, we're a part of that ribbon, or we're moving that ribbon around. It's moving us around. It's a very strange relationship. So tell me about that.
Yeah, this ribbon is really interesting because, if we take it literally in the myth, it's just helping the hero to get out of this labyrinth, which, the builder of the labyrinth, Daedalus, didn't manage, which is very interesting. So, what is it? It's basically like what we call heuristics. Heuristics means like pathfinding, to find the right path. And what does the ribbon tell you? The ribbon tells you, okay, I've been here before. So it's a way something like a Google Maps. So it's like an orientation something. So it's a helper, the one and only helper that leads you out of this something. So it's a prosthesis. And this ribbon is the way how you get out of a closed system. It kind of creates also a lineage of traditions. For example, what we have in our generational stuff is so we give from one generation to another generation.
Sure.
So at certain moments we have been here already. Yeah, just look at this book and so forth. You get the lineage of intellectual thought, rationality, so to speak. That's very interesting. So I got into a weird conundrum here because I was just following my very ribbon, and there was a very simple something. I began with a simple question: so what is a computer? And I had to go back into the Middle Ages to find out, okay, there has been some comparable machine which is kind of connected to the computer, which is also this moment of mediality. It's because it's a space, it's not an instrument, it's not a medium. And this was very funny, that everybody was kind of taking the medium as an instrument, the hammer, so to speak. And then I found, okay, the medium is if you go back to Latin language, is not an instrument in the first place. It is a space, etc. So I got into the Middle Ages and found something like a psychotope, which was formatting people, and they would forget about it. There was a story of Descartes, the story of mechanical philosophy. Everybody takes mechanical philosophy, 17th century. It has been in place in social life since the 12th century. Everybody was using clocks, division of labor, and they had the interest playing out, and they had something like tactfulness and punctuality, getting virtues, etc. It was even forming the moral sphere in a way, and people would forget about it. I was kind of irritated about this forgetting. So my ribbon led me back to the question of the mechane, betrayal of nature, led me back to the story of the alphabet, and then I had to ask myself, where does it come from? So it led me back right into the labyrinth again, which is very, very funny. The funny thing is, I would say, the forgetfulness of a philosophy. And you ask yourself, why do these people want to forget? So I get this wonderful sentence by Harry Houdini, the famous magician, who said, if it is a desire is the father who's writing the text, wenn der Wunsch der Vater des Gedankens ist. If the desire is the father of thought, it is the mother of delusion. And which means, okay, now we're getting into some weird water. It means if somebody following a desire, trying to hide away the mediality of the alphabet, of the mediality of his machinery, etc., he has to pay in form of a symbolical price. There was another saying, Jacques Lacan, in a reference to Kant, he pointed out that everything, that was Kant saying, everything we get out of nature, we have laid in before. So we have projected into nature. So Lacan made a little fun out of that and said okay, if you want to have a rabbit, getting out of your hat, etc., out of your cylinder, etc., you have to put it in before. And then my question was like, so why? So obviously, like all these metaphysical thinkers like Aristotle, Plato, they like presented this wonderful rabbit of metaphysics, etc. And I was asking myself, so they have to put it in before, but how do you call a magician who's not only cheating on his audience, but also cheating to himself? So he's getting delusional. And like understanding philosophy as something which might be in a primary way, a delusional science was like a challenge of the first order.
Of course it is, because we go back to, well, there's a couple of things here. Going back to the chorus for starters, and talking about metaphysics itself. Metaphysics is a prosthesis. It is of the first order, as you would say. And Plato hides that. He puts that so it's no longer really on the table to even see anymore that we're dealing with metaphysics.
He hides it even in a very ingenious way. He hides it by criticizing it. That's wonderful. Like what he says, like, okay, we invented writing so that we're able to forget stuff. But writing is something like a dead art. Like it's like changing something into like a symbolic death, etc. But like you've got something else, like your mental capacity. And this is like the really vivid writing. So that's why the Bible says the letter kills, but your spirit makes it lively again.
Yes. But okay, so let's take this point here. This is the point that Derrida picks up on. He talks about logocentrism stuff. But somehow he misses the point about all of this. It is this course. You have this circling around as you take, and I can't remember the word. It's not an aporia. There is an opening. A cora.
The abyss.
Everything just circles around, and you question, and you say what it is, but you never get into it.
That left me speechless, to be honest. That left me just speechless, and I don't know what to say. Like you see, Derrida getting famous for writing his like dramatology, criticizing like the supremacy of the logics and the like. So getting into deconstructivism, etc. So what is he criticizing? He's criticizing the rule of the letter, the rule of law, whatever, whatever the Greek miracle has been. So he's getting into criticism, and then you ask yourself, okay, come on, so where did it come from? His only explanation is there's like this abyss, and we have to dance around it. And then you ask yourself, really? I mean, there's no abyss. That's the alphabet. And the alphabet is like a dance in itself. I mean, if like Theseus gets out of the alphabet, he has killed the Minotaur, etc. So and all of a sudden, like he and his comrades like create like liturgical dances, playing back what happened in the labyrinth.
Sure, he does. Sure.
Which is like nothing but like a sign what's going on, like something which has been like the deed of this hero, etc., turns into a collective logic. And all of a sudden it gets a ritual. And like Derrida is not explaining this ritual, he just delves into it. And like he's getting even euphoric about it. Okay, I dance around like this Quran. But no, he misses the point. He doesn't go into the labyrinth. He's like a coward, I would say. That's the point. He's taking something for granted which is not granted, because the alphabet is not granted. It's a piece which has brought into like culture and history, etc., and it changed the society. But it's no eternity. It's no devil. It's just like a symbolic logic people have forgotten about.
This makes me, and I may have this wrong, Martin. I'm going to step out here. We get to the shame of Minos in the Labyrinth of the Signs, and we're talking about the youth going through this initiation, and the bull of Zeus was not sacrificed. We're no longer doing sacrifices, but they're acrobats. They're dancing. They're leaping over the bull. They're essentially leaping over something. They're dancing. Is this sort of a precursor to what's happening with this chorus?
Yeah,
this choral.
But like it's a different moment, because here you see the drama playing out. And in the case of Derrida, you do not see the drama. I mean, what does it mean if you talk about like the chorale, like which is like the abyss, which is the nothingness? Uh, Nothingness in itself is like a product of metaphysics. So he's kind of like dancing around a self-constructed like riddle, etc. He's kind of acting like this magician who has like his thought, which is the mother of his ideas, etc. It's the mother of delusion. It's just delusional. And his question should have been, okay, if something like this, like grammatology, comes into being, where does it come from? So what are the preconditions? What are the historical preconditions that allows like a culture to jump over the bill? Take the jumping over the bull as a metaphor. A society does not need fertility cults anymore. Why? Because they found a better fertility cult. And it takes something like, if you get into pedagogy and you teach your children how to do something faster, better, like more efficient and so forth, then you are not a slave of nature anymore. Maybe you get into like a world of the superfluous, because out of the abundance, all of a sudden you have got a lot of like stuff. You've got like storage houses and so forth for your stuff. And you're not the slave of nature anymore. You could say the moment the people start jumping over the bull and they do not sacrifice him anymore, they found something better, which is the alphabet.
And we keep wanting to hide that away. There's a part in here where you mention the integrity of the alphabet needing to be maintained, which, as a spoiler alert, many years down the road in another series that you had been working on over the past 3 years. And we have a big discussion about the integrity of the alphabet. It's no longer a taboo, but it's about maintaining the integrity of it, which is probably part of this forgetting, I would assume. And there's this funny dance, when I'm really going to dance out here, please save me. It's all about how we have to be out of ourselves and in ourselves, and how philosophy is this sort of dance that you do, and getting lost in all of these philosophical terms that miss the primary points that I get from you. As I said to you in the last lecture about semiotics made no sense.
Take, for example, this wonderful Lacanian idea that regression, coming back to stories, means obviously you have not digested this story. It's still a trauma. There was a German philosopher, Hans Blumenberg, who had this wonderful idea. So when like something very old, like a myth from the old days, is still touching you, it means it's still alive. Okay? So, and then we have to ask ourselves, what kind of myths are still touching us? Evidently, the story of Daedalus, the story of the Minotaur. This is really like for a child, you could tell it and the child would understand it right away, etc. And like all these like myths boil down to some very simple questions. The question of Daedalus, Prometheus, Faust, the story of the creator, the story of the artist. So Daedalus is the first artist, a free artist. And then, which is the story of creation. So the one and only thing we really like do not understand is the myth of creation. So we have created our world, meaning it's not nature anymore, which like it's helping us really to get along in our world. So we have to need the red thread of the ribbon of culture. We have to go back into history to try to understand why something came into being. Take like all the words like everybody's taking for like natural, justice, freedom, democracy, and so forth. All this is kind of an outcome of a certain situation. Like nobody, like this famous anthropologist like Bronislaw Malinowski, he wondered about all these primal tribes, had no concept of justice whatsoever. They didn't even have a concept of nature. So they had the idea that, for example, like a pig, a wild pig, a boar, that would produce his like kids if like a little demon got into his ear and fertilized his brain, etc. So they didn't even know about natural reproduction. And Malinowski tried for months like to educate these people and say, come on, you can get house boars, house pigs, etc. You can like domesticate them, and like, but they didn't believe it. That was so funny. Like that there is no nature in the history before the alphabet. And that's the funny thing, like The alphabet is creating nature, but it's the very moment it creates nature, it's a loss of nature. You overcome nature, jump
Sure.
over the bull, so to speak.
Sure. Which is the funny thing. It's a very strange thing because, yes, you just assume it's natural. And we get into natural philosophy. It's curious. You talk to a quantum physicist, say,
Yeah.
and they're trying to talk about how, we live on sand, but they want it to be very stable. But it's not. It's we move and we dance through this space, and the space moves us. And there's this term of introjection and metempsychosis that I've learned from you that we get from this space. It essentially formats us as much as we format it.
It's kind of taken for self-evident. For example, that was one of the most striking lecture experiences I had. I was reading, it was something like in 96 or so, I was reading Thomas Hobbes on natural philosophy. And he begins this book with this wonderful saying, to begin with natural philosophy, we first have to destroy the world. Then you say, what? We have to destroy the world? So natural philosophy is beginning with the world destruction. So and then you ask yourself, and then he continues and says, and then we take our little elements, our little Lego pieces and put them together. So what he kind of takes for granted, so that the elements that like our alphabet allows us to identify, etc., in our nature, that the nature is working itself as the alphabetical system, etc., which we do not know. It might be a hypothesis, etc. Nowadays, people, they kind of convinced that nature is like a computer, etc. But once again, it's like the rabbit that you put into your head, etc. You don't know. Everybody who's taking the word information and uses in the context of natural philosophy is a stupid. I cannot say it otherwise, because it's, in this word information, there's a lot of historical luggage hidden. And if you don't see it, you all of a sudden, you're getting delusional, betrayed by your own instrument.
And this is the story of Daedalus, which you lay right out there. He creates wonderful artifices, but he's cursed because he loses control of them.
Yeah, so he creates human-like being, and it's at the very moment he turns his back to this human-like being, they wander away. the most wondrous, amazing, it's wonderful. And he builds the labyrinth, he doesn't get out. He has to build wings. Getting into metaphysics, starting to fly. It's a wonderful story. And this story tells us all. It tells us that maybe in the depth of our rationality there lurks a monster. The monster of reason. And the monster of reason might get very dangerous the very moment that we do not understand what it is. Maybe it's even helping us for a long time, the philosophers being equipped with it, they could fly. They started to fly into the realm of metaphysics. But the problem is if all of a sudden the psychotope, the labyrinth changes form, what's happening these days, from the mechanical world into the digital world, etc. So we kind of see the monster again.
And we don't like it. We're not comfortable with it.
We're not even aware that there's a monster.
No. And this takes us back to, we were having this discussion earlier yesterday about rationality. And you wrote this piece called Im Arpspicer. It's about working memory. And in it, you took the challenge of an editor that you had at the time of writing about rationality. And I don't think we understand what rationality is. We think we know what rationality is, but we don't. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I would say a rationality, ration is dissecting something into little pieces. It's the very same thing the alphabet is. The alphabet dissects, so to speak, our phonetic word into identifiable pieces, etc. It makes them fungible. You can work with it. And rationality would mean, okay, I got tools. These tools might be combined in a way that they get ever more rational. So rationality in itself has a drive. You could even say rationality is a monster. That's why, like Marx, like he mistook to a certain degree money, which he links to the interest, like to fictional capital. He mistakes us as a monster. Like the one and only thing he says, like, okay, it's the jealous god Israel, or it's a vampire. Money is a vampire, is sucking everything out of you. In the end, like trying to explain the drive, the social drive, he comes back to the monster. A lot of people, like nowadays, when they talk about capitalism, they get into this monster stories.
Sure.
There's some like intoxicated system. But if you mistake your own rationality, the things you built yourself for monster, then you get a monster yourself. I mean, that's what like Nietzsche was saying. He said, like, be aware that if you look into the abyss is inside of you. And if you have a look at the monsters, you might turn into a monster. So it would be really quintessential to find out about our rationality, to find about the hidden beginnings of our culture, to have the red thread and really go back to the labyrinth.
There's this funny thing, because now we're talking about rationality and money and capitalism, all in terms of the labyrinth. And money is a shared delusion, a mother delusion, a shared belief that we use for exchange. And this all happens in, well, the psychotope. When I first learned about the psychotope, it immediately made me think of a stage. There's a stage that we work on, and there's all of these props, these stage machinery that make things work. Money is one of those. And this whole stage really is us. And it has to do with this psychic economy that's between us. And rationality has its own kind of economy that needs to be tamed by our psychic economy, the power of our imagination, or something like that. Can you sort that out a bit more for me?
I would say the funny thing about money is that money has the same destiny as the alphabetical letters. So money, like in 900 before Christ, so the same time like the alphabet comes into being, etc., is still a sacrificial, cultish element. So you use money not to get into exchange, but you use money to get into like a transcendental communication with God. So you have to sacrifice. So you have to sacrifice a bull. That's why, like in the Odyssey of Homer, when people talk about value, that's like a 5 oxen value, 6 oxen value, whatever. Like even the words like this obolus is like, how is it called? Like these little.
Oh, obolos, that's meat on a stick.
Yeah, the stick. Yeah, that's meat on the stick. And like it's rachme, like, which is like it's a dozen of these sticks, etc.
Yeah.
So like all the words that we have belong to the cultish, to the religious element. And like, so money is not like a daily mundane thing, but it's like belonging to like the world of religion, etc. So the question is like, how does it get normalized? It gets normalized the very same way the alphabet gets normalized. So all of a sudden, it's not the temple money anymore, like in Sumer, like in the 3rd millennium before Christ. All of a sudden, it's the polis which is emitting money. It's saying, okay, it's fiat money, the creation, this Daedalus artist story in a way. And then you ask yourself, so that's crazy. It means like, if I use money, I've forgotten about the sacrificial element, like the sacrifice I had to bring to the gods. I'm jumping over the bull, so to speak. Everybody who uses a coin is jumping over the bull. He forgets about nature. He forgets about these specters and these diamonds, etc. And he's taking something for granted, which is not granted. And that's the very same way like Aristotle describes money. He says, we call money nomisma because we can put any arbitrary sign on it, like $100 or $1,000, whatever. I could emit my own currency, this famous Burckhardt, and say, it's $1 million. But very few people would believe that. Okay?
Sure.
So, but like, fiat money belongs to social institutions, like, for example, the Federal Exchange and like a central bank, meaning there has to be a belief system so that something is working. And this belief system means I have to forget about the bull. All of a sudden, you get like a collective oblivion, a collective forgetting, etc., which makes economy even possible. That's the weird moment here. So, like, psychic economy as a conditio sine qua non, and the premise, you have to forget about nature, about the scarcity.
Which makes it the alien logic.
Yeah.
Yeah. You touched on something here too, and pulling us back to this chapter before on money and dead money.
Yeah.
Yeah, on Ransimetos. But Ransimetos is this mythical pharaoh who builds a treasury and a thief outwits him. And I mean, we won't go into that whole story because that'll be coming. But the interesting part is, after it all, he goes to what the Greeks call the invisible one. He goes down to Hades and he gambles. And he gambles with Demeter. And he wins, so she gives him something. He comes back up. And there's this part in the Labyrinth of the Signs where we talk about Demeter has to essentially prostitute herself to get down to Hades. Yeah. I mean, it's a very weird sort of thing. And we're talking about sacred money. She has to prostitute herself, which is in the Ramesses story too, to get into the alien logic, essentially, I think is what's going on. Is that right?
Yeah. The funny thing is, like, Demeter's daughter, Persephone, got abducted. And she wants to find her daughter. But she doesn't know where hell is, Hades. She doesn't know, just like a mortal knows about. So what does she have to do? She looks for a farmer who's kind of keen, to have an interesting encounter with Godhead, etc. He has to prostitute herself, lay down on the ground, etc. And then he tells her where Hades is. It's just such a stupid story, but it's very interesting that even the gods don't know about hell. So if you take these words like symbolon, that means throwing together a symbol, okay? And you see diabolon, tearing apart. And then you say, okay, maybe the diabolical is just the other side of the symbolical. Maybe that the Godheads before Zeus, it didn't know neither about the symbolical nor the diabolical, because everybody was enmeshed with nature. So you could say capitalism, or the emergence of mundane money, which is not sacred anymore, is the new thing. And once again, I was speechless how few people have written about it. Bernard Laum, it was a classical philologist, wrote about sacred money, etc. But if you look for a famous economist of these days, they don't even know about the sacred money origin, which is weird, because money, once again, is a belief system. I would say it's a collective jumping over the bull. That's why we talk about GDP and the like, because so money is our meter and it's not nature anymore.
No, I think we should start to wrap this up, my dear, because we're starting to wander into some territory that's going to be coming, and some other things we're going to post, perhaps. Do you have any final words, or any place else we should take this?
I would say the most amazing experience, writing the Geist der Maschine, was for me getting into a realm that was kind of terra incognita, and that was the collective unconscious, or the monsters of reason, if you want. For example, if Derrida and Heidegger don't know about the monster of reason, that's kind of weird. And then you ask yourself, could it be that philosophy is just an outcome of a certain subconscious, a mastership that has to pay a price but doesn't want to pay this price, forgetting about mediality?
Yes.
So that was the unconscious. And this unconscious was basically the whole leitmotif for this book. So, and the next thing is when you think about the unconscious, you see it in money playing out in a daily way. But you would also get into something like Freud. You can say, come on, Mr. Burckhardt, you should know about there's been this famous guy who detected the unconscious. And then I just there was such a weird story. I wanted to know the very same way I wanted to know about the alphabet. I wanted to know, how does Freud come up with this idea of the unconscious? Because it's not very logical that he was up to that. Because he was basically a brain researcher, and he was interested in the sexual life of the eels, and he was about thinking about synapses and the like. And he was not kind of predestined to be this big psychologist, like who shook the world. And then you look at
Mhm.
Freud, and then you see, wow, he's doing the very same thing that Plato did. He's kind of producing something like a metaphysical entity, etc., but he's hiding away the precondition. You see, like, I was so fascinated by this, seeing Freud constructing the subconscious. And he makes something which is I would say it's a metaphysical action. He says, in the subconscious, there is no negation and no historicity. And I said, what? No negation and no
Which is
historicity,
really weird.
which is metaphysical. Like it's nothing like about a metaphysical saying. And then you look at how he constructs his conscious, and then you see, oh, interesting. It's everything's charged by electricity. That's why we talk about the resistance. Even the words, like we talk about repression, resistance, discharging, like energies and the like. So this whole apparatus, the psychological apparatus, is an electrical one. Basically, it's a historical one, like, because electricity got like invented in the 18th century. So you see, like how much he is indebted to a certain epistemological field, etc. But nevertheless, he is very successful in hiding away all this prehistory, like Plato, who hid away the alphabet. Freud hid away electricity. And I was stunned. I was saying, okay, that's very weird. Like, how can I still talk about the subconscious? The weird thing what Freud does, he makes like the subconscious something like private property. Once again, private property would be a little bit like this hammer, something. I was saying like it's your tool.
Yeah. And to be private property, it's got to have personal history to it.
Yeah. It's not a collective history. It's not something out there. For example, if a psychoanalyst would have a problem, for example, if somebody is getting into a delusion about money, which is a collective delusion. So, I was a kid, imagine 5 or 6 years, I was thinking, if I've got like a yearly interest of 6% or something, and if I get like 569 years, I might be a millionaire with my little pocket money.
Yeah.
So, like this delusion, like delusion of infinity, etc. And that the same delusion that Plato had undergone, that was taking place in Freud's life too, like his invention of the subconscious, was stunning. And the same thing, like if you ask somebody, like, what is the relationship between, like, for example, Mr. Abelard, or like the electricity of the 18th century, mesmerism, etc., and like Freud, like people would say, what? The subconscious is it's in here. It's not out there. But I would say the subconscious is out there. It's not your private property. It's your mediality that you live in.
Yes, that you are a part of. It's this weird thing that I understand now, that we are the mediality. We are part of that space.
Sure.
Well, and where you're going with this with Freud is, because, yes, let's just keep talking here, because we're now talking about the universal machines, the great machines, which are not devices. They are us. They are what are out of our power of our imagination, what we create. And what we create, which would be playing out in the psychic economy, is what we talk about, the psychotope, which is the outsourced unconscious of the machine. As you go on to describe it.
You could speak of a labyrinth, which is kind of like interesting.
Yes.
Because that's why this myth still touches us, because we feel we are in a labyrinth, like these days, like in the psychotope, and we do not know about a lot of stuff. So we have to have red threads. So what do? We go to the library, we look for stuff, etc. And all of a sudden, like maybe somebody cut off like the thread. And then you say, oh, interesting, it's not there anymore. Like, and that's why like the library flies away. But we have to find like these leanings, and we have to go back into history, etc., to find about us, about stuff that is affecting us today. And that's really hard, because you're lost without all these tools which help you find your way.
Well, but that's the point we are right now, and because we are in between machines, and the one that we are in started with the steam engine and with the barometer. Essentially, it's been gathering power for quite some time. And the other thing to point out, which we haven't really talked about, is the Labyrinth of the Signs is all about what we call the Greek miracle, the Western opening, the Occidental opening, which everybody has issues with. And part of what I think people have issues with is it has a certain virility about it. The alien logic has a certain power to it that
absolutely.
has given us our world, everything we know and we do. It works off of it. And it has infected, if you will, other cultures.
That's the interesting thing.
Yes.
That's the interesting thing and question also. Like, there is a miracle which is self-evident. Everybody who gets like the alphabet takes it as like a mechanism which is self-evident. So that's why you don't ask. I recall like when I was writing about the alphabet and my little son, like I taught him like what the ox, like the aleph sign was, like it was the ox in the yoke, etc. And then he came to school and then the teacher painted the aleph sign onto the chalkboard and asked, do you know the sign? And Philip said, yeah. There's like an ox in the yoke, etc. But the Greek called it like the alphabet, like they call it now Aleph, the A, etc. And his teacher was so irritated. So he got into the internet, like made a little research. And day after he came back and asked, how could you know? And this is the interesting thing. How could you know? Like, meaning that everybody's forgetting about like the fundamentals. That's a big problem, I would say, because all of a sudden you take certain things for granted, which may not be granted anymore. For example, like a lot of like stuff which has been working fine in the mechanical world, etc., are kind of dubious today. For example, we're talking very much about the interest stuff. Like,
yes,
we take like the interest as something very normal, etc., but we changed our whole currency system to an attention economy, and all of a sudden we see like our attention span gets shorter and shorter and shorter. It doesn't even live up to what the interest gave us. Interest gave us the stability of a year or two, etc., and now we've got the stability of nothing. Like not even the moment, etc. And all of a sudden we have to realize maybe our money system of the Middle Ages, that's over. Maybe we have to find something totally new. That's the biggest humiliation you may think of. That's why everybody's running away from it, because they realize, okay, we see the monster of reason. And that's why everybody's afraid of like artificial intelligence. It's a monster of reason.
Very much so. And when it does horrible things, they don't realize that it's a reflection of them.
Yeah.
Or that's they do, and it scares them. It scares them. Yeah.
It's a funny thing. They jump over the bull, so to speak, but they mistake all of a sudden like this jumping over the bull as something which is like the action of Godhead. I was like irritated. I saw like a lot of videos of the Silicon Valley rationalists, and they kind of have a perennial discussion about doom, the upcoming doom of artificial intelligence. And I asked myself, really? So how can you talk about doom and about apocalyptic scenarios if everything that's at stake has been made by man? It's just a reflection of yourself.
How can you? Where is
There's
the
no
monster?
artificial intelligence. There's you and the mirror.
Exactly. It is you. It is your rationality. And it makes you very uncomfortable. And if we keep pushing on this story then, my dear, as we're talking now universal machines, we've left the Radarwerk, the wheel work, and we are moving into the digital work, the digital machine, which no longer is about representation. It's now about virtuality. And
we're in the labyrinth of the sign again. So we kind of got lost here, and we have no way out. We don't even have a red ribbon that lead us out, unless we get into programming. That might be, for example, a way of storing interest and knowing really what we do. But like most of the people are really lost, and we do not have wings. We just have the feeling that behind the next corner, there's this weird minotaur lurking, waiting to eat his victim. That's why we talk about doom. That's why we talk about apocalyptics and the like. So we are lost in the labyrinth of the signs, and we don't see it. So the myth is still vivid, I would say.
It does. And this leads us to the psychology of the machine, which is just fascinating, because I think that's the key to this. Once you start to understand the whole psychology of it, you can start to find a red thread again within this virtuality, I think,
Yeah,
maybe.
you would look for the reason, the monsters of reason, and that if it's you, yourself, etc., then you have to ask yourself, so interesting. So obviously I want to be amped up by metaphysics. I want to have like to
Mhm.
command this monster, etc. So what does it do for us? I mean, a computer is like a monster in many ways. For example, if you just program in
Sure.
a way which is kind of convincing, obviously it does something for you that even 1,000 people could not do for you.
This is the point you make in Art Spicer, at least that I got. When you're talking, you have human rationality and you have what you would call computer rationality. And rationality is a certain economics. It just keeps chewing things up to become more efficient all the
Yeah.
time, to make things better, to abstract. And it needs to be controlled. The monster of reason is us. We can get lost in that economics of it. We can lose sight of the
The
good.
funny thing, take the Daedalus story. You just have the story unfolding with the sacrifice, which is not given anymore. And all of a sudden, this little young boys jump over the pool, etc. And you see, nobody was really free in his decisions, like a tragedy playing out. So all of a sudden, like the story of Pasiphae, the story of why the labyrinth has to be built, like to hide away the shame of minus. And all of a sudden, like this like story unfolding, like Daedalus losing himself in this labyrinth and so forth. So you see, there's no freedom in this. Like it's like one thing causes the next. So we're getting into like a process that we do not command. So we might have the feeling that we might steer all this, but like we have to understand what the story is, which led to the labyrinth. And I would say understanding the labyrinth of the signs that we're in today is really quintessential for society. And I really doubt that a lot of people are undertaking this challenge.
Is there something to be said here? I mean, we talk a lot about the aura, the good, the res publica, the creation of things that are beautiful, which means they're good. And in this day and age of the monstrosity of rationality, if you want to put it that way, that's playing out with the digital work. We talk about wanting the good, but we don't seem to quite know what that is anymore. Would that be part of the problem?
Yeah, but because we created a labyrinth of signs, and if the primary challenges of this labyrinth of the signs, for example, like that every element that you digitize is turning into something superfluous, like X to the N,
Mm-hmm.
then you get into real problem. You have to understand that. And then you come to the next thing, then you say, okay, I have to be rational in a way that I really get into this never-ending process of improving stuff in the digital age. Learn to live with it in a way. And I would say a lot of contemporaries these days, they say, yeah, no, I don't want to touch it. Like I'm the old authentic analog self.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like you lose presence of mind. You're
You
not part of
do.
the world anymore. You're kind of excluded.
You are. You get into this place which, yes, the artist who wants to know where they are, but the artist as the virtuoso, as you would say, is over. But once you start to get into the digital technology and you work towards creating something of beauty that touches you, it becomes a prosthesis once again. It becomes a brush in the hands of an artist. You're creating new things. That's sort of what's not quite grasped yet. And it's not about making the money. It's about creating something beautiful.
I would say the way like to find peace and like to get along with the labyrinth and even make it like work for you, etc., would
Mm-hmm.
mean that you have to overcome this humiliation. What Freud said about the uncanny, that you're not
Mm-hmm.
master anymore in your own house, etc. Take the labyrinth. So the labyrinth is already like fortification against a certain shame, trying to hide away something. The guy who built it doesn't get out anymore. So he's not master in his own construction anymore. There's something uncanny here. So the whole story tells like how a society kind of gets out of it, and all of a sudden we see this parallel story playing out with Catmos, etc., trying to find a sister Europa, etc.
Right.
And like bringing the alphabet to Greece, and the gods like celebrated with this marriage with the harmonia, and it's a big thing. And you could say like this, we have to bring these stories together. The tragedy of this big humiliation, the tragedy of the monster of reason, and the positive element, the reason in itself, like, is overcoming the monsters of nature, which is wonderful. So you could say, okay, that we embrace the alien logic of a symbolic order, like the alphabet, etc. Like, it liberates us from sacrificing to some demons and some specters out there in the woods. So we don't have to do that anymore. That's wonderful. So who wants to be like persecuted by some demons?
Nobody. We want to create wonderful things to move us forward. Yeah. Folks, stay tuned.
That was it.
There will be more to come. There will be more.